Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This week's race C is unfortunately a lot like the Group 3 Daytona race, and that just means that the meta car is pretty much almost unstoppable. Let's get into it. Within the Group 2 category, there are actually 9 cars, 3 of them being 2016 GT500 cars. For tracks with really long straights, that's okay because 2 of them have incredibly high top speed, but when it comes to any kind of course that could be a handling course, only the 2016 cars are viable. Since the Lexus is the slowest of all of them, that's our anti-meta car of the week. The NSX is absolutely dominant on the leaderboard, but I managed to put the RCF into 44th position. I actually had it in 47th position, but accidentally deleted the replay, so I had to do it again, and luckily I was able to do it in just a few minutes. You'll see that absolutely none of the other cars within the top 100 are the Lexus, so yeah, again, that's why it's our anti-meta car. Approaching the first corner, it's okay to use this extra road here on the outside as long as you keep 2 tires within the boundaries of the white lines. Making sure you avoid the grass on turn-in, right when the 2 white lines converge is when you're going to hit the brakes. Downshift to 4th and only use enough brakes to make sure that you use all of the curb here and get back on the pavement before you hit the grass. A perfect exit will have you coming up on the curb here, but if you accidentally go in the grass but you still have a lot of momentum, you can still make it work. Turn in for the next corner before you see the sign on the left. No braking is required, stay full throttle. You can see the high yellow sausage curb here on the right. Your goal is to get right next to it right at the very end of it. Follow the red and white curb and brake right when you get to the end of it. We're going to downshift all the way to 3rd and turn in using the inside curbing as well, but be careful if you just glance off it, you will bounce off it. Be aggressive on the entrance. Continue turning in as you throttle out towards the exit, taking note that the higher part of this curb, the outside part of this curb, will make you bounce, so you can either go inside of it or straddle it. Inside is safer, but outside is faster. When your car is parallel to the curb, that's when we're going to lift off the throttle and turn in even more. Right before you get to the inside curb, we're going to brush the brakes just barely, enough to get the outside tires really close, but not on the red and white curbing. Using too much of that curbing will actually make you slide, which will put you all the way in the grass here, and obviously we don't want that. When you see the white curb on the outside, drive all the way up onto it, and the end of it is when you turn in. Stay full throttle throughout this entire section, hit this curb but not too much because you will slide, and when you see the grass on the left disappear right before the colored part of that barrier, you're going to turn in, again staying full throttle and using the entirety of that inside curb. Continue steering to the right side of the track and align yourself on the red and white curbing. Once your car gets all the way past where the sand begins on the right, that's when you'll brake. When you get down to 3rd gear, we're going to start turning in, staying fully on the brakes right about here. You want to get down to 2nd gear after you pass the curbing on the right and use as much of this curb as you can without going all the way over the outside part of the red and white curb. A 3rd gear exit here is both faster and safer. The next few corners are, in my opinion, the most difficult part of the track and where I see most people lose a lot of the time that they're losing. You've got to be really brave, but you've also got to be really smart with how you approach each of these corners. As you set yourself up for the braking zone, you want to get as close to that sausage corner as we possibly can and then move as much of your car over the white line as you can without going all the way over it. There are a couple of black marks on the pavement, but what you can really look for is this beige wall here on the left. That is your braking point. Downshift to 5th and brake only enough so that your left tires go over the red and white part of the outside of the curb right here. When I turn in here, I don't actually use all of the curbing. I put the inside tires on the red and white curb, but you can go a little bit faster if you put the outside tires, though it is riskier because you can make your car spin pretty easily. You're going to continue turning left even as you go past the curb, and we're going to look for this little yellow mark in the ground here on the left. Straighten your front wheels before braking, downshift to 4th, and trail brake heavily as you get onto this curb, using as much of it as you possibly can. You want to make sure you don't exit until you're almost to the very end of that curb, because if you exit earlier, you're probably going to go into that wall. Drive towards the marshals on the right and align yourself with the edge of the track just briefly, but when you see the black wall on the left, that's when we're going to turn in and angle ourselves towards the braking point. This little line here that's right before the start of the curb on the outside is your braking point. Instead of straightening the car out and going full brake, we're going to continue turning in and just bleed off speed slowly using less than 100% brake the entire time. Getting to 2nd gear before the end of the curb on the right can help you rotate, then back up to 3rd and on the throttle as soon as you apex. Continue steering, of course, until you're absolutely sure you're not going to touch the grass, because if you hit the grass, you'll go all the way off and your lap will be ruined. If you're using the same view that I am, the next braking point can be pretty tricky to see because you are going up on a crest, so I'm going to give you 3 points of reference. Our braking point is right before that little gap in the curb ahead. There's also a yellow bit on the wall to the left, as well as a hanging sign on the right that can all give you clues as to where that is if you can't see it quick enough. You want to immediately turn in and trail brake, getting to second gear. I didn't quite use enough at the curb. You can go all the way up to that yellow sausage curb, but then be very careful as you get on the throttle because second gear is squirrely, as you can see. You don't need to track out all the way to the left. In fact, before you get to that curb on the inside to the right, you want to start turning in. Right before you get to the curb, you want to lift so you can tighten the angle just a little bit and get back on the throttle really early. I actually got on the throttle a little bit too early, so I had to upshift in order to stop pushing out to the side, and I almost went off. Look for the digital flag sign on the right. That is when you're going to start braking. You can actually brake while still tracking out because we're going to bleed off speed before we get to our ultimate turn-in point. Thanks to GT's Magic ABS, we can use a lot of steering while braking really heavily. We want to get to second gear and turn in before you get to that beige part of the wall on the right. Down to first gear and continue trail braking as you approach the inside of the corner, but you want to be fully off the brakes before you hit this curb. That'll free up even more steering angle available for you. Get on the throttle in second gear at the end of the curb there, and then look for the beginning of the curb on the inside to the right here. Turn in about when you get there, but it's really going to depend on how fast you're going, so you're just going to have to play around with it till you get really used to it. I like to shift up to third gear as I lift off to make sure that I can apex here, and be very careful that you don't under or oversteer because hitting that wall feels really terrible. Alright, let's look at it in full speed. A massive part of getting a really good lap here is utilizing as much of the outside part of the track as you can, like the curbs, and the first corner is a very good example of that. You want to use as much of the curb as you possibly can, just barely actually being on track for that first corner. This second corner is very similar. You're going to go all the way up on the inside, and you can actually go a lot wider than I did, but it is a little bit more dangerous because if you don't straddle that outside curb perfectly, it just makes you bounce. It's easy to stay full throttle here in the time trial, but you can actually do it as well. As long as there's no dirty air in front of you, you can do the same thing in the actual race itself. The banking and elevation in this corner means that you can brake really late, and I actually slowed down too much, so I got a little bit of oversteer coming out, but it wasn't too bad. You can go a little bit faster than that, but don't push your luck too much or you'll go off into the sand. Through these S's, you have to be really brave. There's really only two parts where you slow down. We're going to slow down just a little bit as we enter the S's, and we're going to get full throttle as we go back to the left, and then brake one more time to fourth gear for the exit. And of course, use as much of the curb as you can, going almost entirely off the track. If you track out all the way towards that wall, you can get your tires stuck between the curb and the wall, and you don't want that. Like I said in the breakdown for that left-hander that we just passed, you don't actually want to align yourself all the way on the right. It just wastes time. Take advantage of the arrow and the Magic ABS in Gran Turismo and just continue turning as you're slowing down. Pretty much every corner entry and exit for this last sector is really non-traditional in the sense of how you'd really approach most corners in racing, but that also means that during the race itself, you have lots of different options for how you set yourself up for overtakes. Alright, I hope that helped. Let's go over one of the races that I did. First things first, we're going to go +5 on the brake balance. The front tires tend to die a lot faster than the rears, so you want to do whatever you can to put a lot of the emphasis of the tire wear on the rear. Secondly, if you're starting in anything except first place, you want to start on the mediums rather than the softs. The dirty air is so incredibly bad that if you're behind anyone at all, you're going to eat away your tires, your pace is going to be much slower, and it's a bad vibe. So make sure that unless you're in first place, you are starting on mediums. And if you are in first place, I would still suggest starting on mediums. Fun fact, I actually completely finished this video and then realized that I did not like the last part of it, the race breakdown, because it is actually from my stream. My software recently broke and I have not been able to fix it, so I'm now using OBS to record game footage. But I digress. I just did this race again. I just recorded this. I had a pretty good race until the very end, which we'll get into, but I might repeat myself. I don't know if I said what I'm about to say during the part of the video that I deleted or if it was earlier on in the guide, so I apologize if I'm being redundant. But there are two main things that we've got to focus on when it comes to the actual race. One is the dirty air, which I touched on just a little bit. It is incredibly difficult to maintain the same pace that you usually would in clean air when you're in dirty air. So you're going to see me braking a lot earlier, getting on the throttle a lot later, and turning in more, aiming myself more narrow when it comes to the exits because my front end is going to wash out. Your front end will wash out when you are in the dirty air. That is because this is a high downforce car. And because of that, there's also a huge skill gap when it comes to public lobbies. Even though this lobby was a little bit closer. You're still going to see that there's a massive skill gap between what I'm able to do, the people at the front of the race in general, and then the people towards the back of the race. For whatever reason, a lot of people can't figure out high downforce cars, so if you find yourself getting really quick as you're practicing for this combo, you're going to find that you're going to need to watch out for situations such as this. I got extremely lucky, but I always have my head on a swivel when it comes to that sector specifically and any of the high-speed sections because, like I keep saying, there's a massive skill gap, and it's all because of the high downforce cars. The NSX on raw speed is absolutely faster than the RCF and the Nismo GTR, but it's also affected less by the dirty air because it has better turn-in anyways, so the percentage that you lose when you're in dirty air, it's nowhere near as bad as when you're in this car. If you look at the delta, I'm just within 1 second of the car ahead, which means that I'm already going to be feeling the effects of the dirty air. I really hope that I get a clean lap. I can't recall if I got a completely clean air lap when it came to the medium compounds, but the medium compound tires on top of the dirty air means that you're going to have to brake earlier, like I keep saying, turn in earlier, and get on the throttle later. This is not a super common occurrence, but it happens enough that I should mention it. You may have noticed that I took a completely different line than the guy ahead. I was using the inside curbing a lot, and he didn't use it at all. And the reason that that matters is when you're not following directly behind someone, you might not be getting dirty air. But if your lines intersect, then you might experience dirty air in the middle of a corner, or if you have someone weaving in front of you, you might end up feeling it, and that can actually cause you to crash. I've had someone weaving really heavily in front of me because they didn't want me to pass, and going into a braking zone and going into a corner, it actually made me slide out because the conditions of the aerodynamics changed mid-corner. So it's probably not going to happen a lot, but considering the fact that the last sector of this track is completely open to interpretation when it comes to racing people, there are going to be a lot of different lines. You should be wary of the fact that it can happen. That wall that we just passed on the left is also something you really need to be wary of. A lot of people are going to be going too fast through that S section, and if they hit that wall, they're suddenly going to slow down a lot, and a lot of people will bounce off that wall. Now, most of the people I've raced against are really wary of getting out of the way of cars behind them, but as you're going to see at the end of this, some people are using it to their advantage, and it's not pretty. So be very careful. If you see someone taking a really weird line and it looks like they're going to hit that wall, just let off the throttle and try to give them a lot of space. And when it comes to dirty air, obviously it's going to affect us a lot, but one thing you can use to your advantage is when someone is approaching another driver and they're experiencing dirty air, you're pretty much going to be on even ground again. And so if they're not quite as good as you at managing the dirty air effect, then you can have a huge advantage when it comes to third-partying that battle. I've complained a lot about the dirty air in this video, and to be fair, it does actually exist in real life, but if you want an example of how incredibly bad it is in this game, go ahead and do this race, feel the experience for yourself, and then search up some GT500 videos, and you can see for yourself that it's not nearly as bad in real life. These cars can follow each other a lot closer than they can comfortably follow each other in this game, and it's something that's actually been a problem since GT Sport. I don't know why they won't fix it. Okay, this is actually pretty funny. This guy moved out of the way because he wanted to defend against me, but when you're following someone really close in a straight like this, if you move out of that line, then the person is going to have the slip like I did. And so I was able to easily pass him despite the fact that he was defending. If he had simply stayed on his line and just let me try to pass, he would still have slipstream. I wouldn't, and I would not have been able to get in front of him. So that's something to be wary of when you're in the middle of a battle like that. I thought it was pretty funny, but hopefully he's a good sport about it. Hopefully he realizes what he did, because he didn't do anything to retaliate or anything like that, but I would be pretty upset if I were him. This penalty zone can actually be an issue. A lot of people move over to the inside just to be off the line because the ghosting isn't always perfect, and sometimes you can run into a ghost and it actually makes you collide. But one of the things you need to worry about is when people serve a penalty, especially if it's a really long one, their braking point is going to be different, and a lot of people try to compensate for that by braking a lot later, and that can cause people to inadvertently run into you. So just watch your rearview mirrors when anyone's serving a penalty next to you. Now, I talked about that wall that a lot of people run into, and this is a really good example of why you need to watch out. It's also a really good example of what you should do. This person in front was paying a lot of attention to their rearview mirrors, and I'm really glad because I don't think I would have been able to move out of the way. I took the normal line, they saw, and they moved directly out of the way just in time for me to slide by. Not everyone is going to be that courteous, and some people might even use it to their own advantage. Again, I'm foreshadowing. In the case of that collision with that guy right there, he did one of my least favorite things in all of sim racing, and he tried to squeeze me on the exit of a corner. That's the kind of thing that you just can't ever get away with. If you try to squeeze someone on the exit of a corner when they can't see you, then they're just going to run into you. He didn't give me all of the space. I gave him about, I'd say, a car width and a half to the grass, and he tried to take more. There's no way I can adjust my line on the exit, and I shouldn't have to either when it comes to exiting a corner like that. And so he definitely caused that collision. I hate seeing stuff like that, but I also don't know if he did that on purpose. So if you did that on purpose, shame on you. That's silly. Don't ever do that because you're just going to cause a collision. If it was on accident, then that's something you just need to pay attention to and get better at. Jumping up to when we catch Mad Boy Jack, I did not realize this at the time, but he was actually already on softs, which is why I was able to catch him so quickly. The worn softs are super slow. Now, that means he's going to have to switch to the mediums as I'm switching on softs, and I'm going to be behind him. And if I can't get in front of him really quickly, it's going to completely ruin my pace for the rest of the race. If you damage your softs at the beginning, they obviously can't get better, and so you need to do whatever you can to avoid that kind of situation. Unfortunately for me, a lot of people ended up passing when I was in the pits. People are on different strategies, and of course I still had to deal with trying to pass Mad Boy Jack. My plan was just to bide my time, not ruin my tires, and then try to take the pass at the hairpin, but then this happened. I really lucked out because both these guys kind of messed up. That guy took the bounce like we see a lot, and when Jack tried to pass him, he got on the throttle way too early and just went straight off, so that was about as lucky as I could have possibly gotten. Jumping ahead again, we've caught Greenblood, who was actually someone who had not taken a pit yet. We had passed him a long time ago, so I didn't really know what to expect. I knew I could get past him really quickly, but then it looked like he was going to defend super hard. In reality, I think he was aware that we were on different strategies because he just lifted off as soon as I went over to the side, so that was another really lucky situation for me. We can see that Benjoy is now going to the pits. He took a lot longer on the mediums, which meant that his softs were going to be better than mine for the rest of the race, so first place was pretty much out of the question unless my pace was magical compared to his. We also had two other people who had to go into the pits that we weren't really racing anymore, and that just left myself, Benjoy, and Maxim. I keep mentioning that you've got to be really careful with this wall, and this is exactly why. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say he did this on purpose. He could have kept hugging that wall, but as soon as I got close, he moved all the way to the middle of the track. He didn't just move off the wall, he didn't just barely inch back on, he moved all the way out to the middle of the track right as I was approaching him, and on top of that, he would know in that situation that he caused that accident, because obviously he hit the wall, and without that happening, I wouldn't have hit him. But with that, he immediately just took off. So in my mind, he 100% deliberately ran into me to stop me from passing him. And I think it was pretty clear on his next defensive move that he was going to do anything rather than let me pass him, even if I'd earn it. Now, a quick note on situations like this. If you get damage, it's not only going to slow you down a lot, but it's also going to ruin your tire wear. Just a little bit of damage can completely destroy your tires. So if you're running a strategy where you know you're going to run out of tire before the end and you get in an accident, you're going to run out of tire way before the end. So you've got to be really careful with situations like this. Now, you may not realize it, but I generally get into some kind of incident like that multiple times per day when it comes to racing, but I don't like to show it on YouTube because for whatever reason, even if it's pretty cut and dry, a lot of people just like to argue in favor of someone who's even clearly dirty. But I'm going to go ahead and show what happened between myself and this Maxim guy. It became really clear to me after he pulled in front that he was going to do absolutely anything. And of course, he goes and tries to defend all the way on the inside, despite the fact that the only reason he's in front of me is because he caused an accident between us. And so as we get here, he barely gives me space and then tries not to give me space. Now, if he had his way, and I just took the line that he tried to force me into, I'd go over that sausage curb. And that's not an accident. He was very much trying to push me into that sausage curve because that would have made me flip or spin or go into a wall, and he'd be totally fine because the game would register it as my fault. But I decided to show that because he has now done two things that completely ruined my race. My car's damaged again. His race is ruined too, but this is the kind of desperation you can see from a lot of people. He's a B driver, and I know not all of you B drivers are like this, but there's a lot of desperation in sim racing in general, but in the lower levels, the desperation is extremely high. And unfortunately, this was second split because of one of the previous weeks, my DR got reset on this account. So yeah, I usually wouldn't show something like that, but since the rest of the race was so incredibly good and in my favor, and I think I might have actually been able to battle with the guy for the win up here, I want to put that guy on blast. He did two pretty ridiculous things, but almost had the ability to say that it wasn't on purpose. I wouldn't believe that for a second. Sorry that you had to watch that, but yeah, I would rather put a guy like that on blast than just let him get away with it, and I'm very glad that I beat him in this race. The race was pretty much completely over and decided before this last jump, but I did want to show you the final standings of the race because it's pretty hilarious. Like I said, even though this car is the anti-meta, it's still pretty much one of the meta cars. It's just that none of the other cars can do anything, but it was really nice to see the end where I was the only Lexus in a sea of NSXs, which is pretty funny. So yeah, it's not really an anti-meta car, but it's as anti-meta as we can get and still have a chance at getting a good result. Thank you again for watching my videos. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making a new guide every single week. Thank you.